So, why do people hate Tears of the Kingdom? Yes, I know. Why is this guy making yet another video on this game? Well, it's very simple. I didn't feel like I was done speaking in my first video. So I wanted to make this to discuss a few things that I keep seeing about the game. I said in my first video that it was meant to be a positive-only video, and it seems that a few people seem to have missed that aspect. So I want to go through a few of the cons just to appeal to the people who wanted a little bit more than just the reason I loved the game. So here's every problem that I understand, but others see as extreme issues. These are things I see, but don't really find to be all that much of an issue for me. If you have a problem with that, then click off this video. And if you want my TOTK positive video, then the link is in the description. And I'm also saving the only complaint I actually agree with near the end. So stay tuned for that. And just to get one thing out of the way, when I say hates, I don't necessarily mean everyone who dislikes the game hates it. Hate is a strong word. You can dislike something, but not everyone hates it. Some really do hate it, while others just simply didn't enjoy it. So with that clarified, let's get going. So let's begin with the main issue, the reused Hyrule. Obviously, this would be an issue to those who have spent hundreds of hours in Breath of the Wild, as they would not have fun exploring this world because there's just not enough changes. I played Tears of the Kingdom first, so I did not have a problem with this. I had so much fun exploring Hyrule because I wasn't spoiled by Breath of the Wild. But I cannot deny that this is still an issue. Most people who played Tears of the Kingdom played Breath of the Wild before and had already seen what there was to see. Aside from just fallen debris, a safer Hyrule Castle, a much safer Death Mountain, Sky Islands, a hidden underground ecosystem, no guardians, and different monster camps, there's not much to differentiate itself. Even the Great Sky Island is a literal copy and paste of the Great Plateau. You meet a Ghost King, you obtain your 4 abilities by going to 4 shrines, and while it does do a pretty good job of introducing you to the new mechanics like Zonai devices and Bright Bloom seeds, it just wasn't enough for a lot. I didn't notice this as an issue until I finally played Breath of the Wild. Now one would think this ruined my Breath of the Wild experience, but to be honest I still had fun going through Hyrule. It still felt fresh and new to me somehow, but I can see why this was a problem for others. While I myself cannot say that this was an issue, I can say that this was an issue for so many others. While I do think the game should have remained in this Hyrule, they could have changed a bit more, or maybe even allow us to go back in time and journey through that Hyrule way thousands of years in the past where Zelda was. How cool would it have been to go back in time with Zelda and fight Ganondorf in that era of Hyrule, and even get a secret stone of our own? It would have been so much cooler. But I understand what they were going for, even if I can see the cons with it. So while I didn't have an issue with the lack of changes, for the sake of others, I wish they did in fact change more. Even the combat isn't safe from this. Breath of the Wild's combat is already controversial, which I don't even know how to begin with. Part of it I think is because of weapon durability, but at least that was fixed in Tears of the Kingdom with the fuse ability. I think it just made it way better. And even then, there was still controversy. I didn't want to go into detail about combat in my previous video, because I'm saving it for a future video. But basically the combat was exactly the same as in Breath of the Wild, and while we did also get Zonai devices, they weren't pushed and emphasized enough for some to care. In some people's eyes, why take the time to create bizarre contraptions to destroy enemies when you could just go to the simple route and whack them with a sword? Granted, weapons did get a boost with special effects, but still felt pretty much the same. And I don't actually think it's as bad as others say. If you, like me, play Tears of the Kingdom first, then at least you have the option of using the general combat system from the first game. It gives the option, and yes, I do also think that having options can hurt an experience as some will most likely just choose the easier route. At least it's there. And I didn't have a problem with it, but I understand why some do. But I don't. And on the topic of weapons, we can also find non-decayed versions in the depths, which I think is great because they can be extremely powerful and you have to go hunting for them to have that power. And while we're on the topic of the depths, let's talk about them. Yes, that was an attempt at a transition. Don't judge me. Anyway, I think the depths are great, but I can see the criticisms. It's all one biome aside from the area beneath Death Mountain, so it's extremely bland. It's so empty and all of it looks exactly the same. Look at one picture in the depths. Now look at this one. Barely any difference. They look like they would be on the same area. Well, they're literally on the other sides of the map, but you probably never would have guessed that. It's so big and empty and it's all the exact same. There's a few areas with some noticeable differences, but not nearly enough. But either way, you probably wouldn't even notice because it's all dark. But once you've got all the light routes activated, then you can see everything, and it's very bland and boring. I really wish they had added more content other than the mazes, treasure hunting, froxes, and the Yiga. It's definitely the area I spend the least amount of time in, but before I got it all lit up, it was a massive highlight for me. But one thing that is always a highlight for me is the Sky Islands. It's so beautiful, and I actually find the repetitive islands fun. Yes, I know, sue me, whatever. But everything I did on the islands was a great time. No complaints. Well, except for one. There's just too little of them. There was originally a ton of them, full of content, but then they made the terrible decision before releasing the game of removing a bunch of them because it was quote-unquote too cluttered. Even in promotional stuff you can see so many more islands, and I was so excited to go explore all of them. This made a lot extremely upset, myself excluded. I love the islands, too little or not. I get why they were removed in Central Hyrule because of the Demon Dragon fight, but why places like Gerudo Desert? There's like one, and it only has the King Leok. It's extremely disappointing, and while I love the islands for what they are, I would have loved to have some more. And we're not going to be getting them anyway because there's no DLC. So yeah, we're stuck with what we've got. But it honestly could have been so much worse. Okay, let's talk about dungeons again. I talked about these in the previous video, and I said that I really like them. They were a pretty big improvement over the Divine Beasts, and the unique designs and structures made them stand out, and the bosses were way better than the Blights. I did enjoy the Divine Beasts though, and I thought they were a pretty good way of breaking tradition, which was Breath of the Wild's whole thing in the first place. And the same problem with the Divine Beasts applies to the dungeons. I don't see it as a problem, but others do, so I'm obligated to talk about it. The whole terminal thing that was used for Breath of the Wild returns, and while I think it was utilized a bit better because you require the sages in order to activate them, they function exactly the same. You need to go scour the whole dungeon and find these devices that activate either a door or an elevator or whatever. This is exactly how it works in Breath of the Wild. You find all the terminals and you take control of the Divine Beasts. So while I do not have a problem with this concept, and was fine having it in both games, I understand why some were mad. It wasn't different enough. It played pretty much the same, which I cannot deny. I just personally didn't have a problem with it. And yes, that's probably because I played Tears of the Kingdom first, but when I went to play Breath of the Wild, I wasn't annoyed. It still felt new, purely by the fact that the way you do it and the settings are different. Still an issue I'm glad they sorted in Echoes of Wisdom, minus the water dungeon, but it wasn't terrible. Another thing about dungeons is that they progress the story. That's how they generally work in Zelda games. But now let's focus on the story, and why so many people just outright hated it. Not me though, I personally loved it. But once again, I understand why it's hated. First of all, it follows the same format as Breath of the Wild. Everything is in the past, and you never really experience it in the present. Tears of the Kingdom is slightly more involved, but not by much. There are more characters in the present that are way more involved in the story than in the previous game, which is great, but it could have been more. The main issue people have is because of the dragon tears. You find these geoglyphs scattered throughout Hyrule, and each one has a pool of tears. When you interact with one of these tears, you activate a cutscene, much like when you unlock one of Link's memories in Breath of the Wild. But the problem is that each geoglyph has a set cutscene, which is a problem because that means if you go to the wrong one, you can completely spoil what happens and you don't need to go watch the others. Thankfully, I knew this beforehand, and I was able to look up the order of how to watch them without spoiling myself. If you talk to Impa on the way to Rito Village at the Rauru geoglyph, you can start a quest that takes you to the Forgotten Temple, and find a room that was hidden in Breath of the Wild, which tells you which tier to go to in order. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't know this. It's extremely vague and it ruins some's experience, which is a real shame. I got to see this happen in the intended way though, so I was fine, but I've seen so many complaints about this. Yes, it's vague and not everyone will understand it, so I see why they don't like it. It ruins experience, especially because you can just go straight to Zelda and get the Master Sword without ever finding the tears and find out she was the Light Dragon the whole frickin' time. So then it renders the tears useless. Even I cannot defend this, but thankfully I did not end up with this issue and was able to experience the game properly. I just wish the tears could give you the cutscenes in order no matter which tier pool you find. Not for my sake, but for others. I really wish it hadn't happened, but unfortunately the developers made this terrible decision, and there's nothing we can do about it. I myself do hate this, but not like others do. This is actually the only problem with the game I can 100% agree with. The story I think is fine, even great, but the storytelling wasn't. It doesn't even mesh well with the present events. There's a puppet Zelda running around causing trouble, and if you already know that she's the fake one from the memories, the NPCs don't. You can't tell them that she's a fake, they just go along with the idea that it's the real Zelda when it's really not. Once again, not a problem with me till I didn't get around to going to the tear pools till after getting Minoru.
Tulin, my brave fledgling.
I know that voice. It's you. You're the one who's been guiding us?
Yes, I am your ancestor from a time long ago.
So it didn't ruin anything for me. But the same cannot be said for so many others. I feel sorry for them because the game's story was told so terribly that they couldn't see the beauty in it. I'm sure that there are those out there, however, that probably experienced it the same way I did. And I'm happy that there are. But Nintendo, you're probably not going to see this, but please don't ever go back to this form of storytelling, ever. So we've reached the final segment, and one I do actually partially agree with, other than the previous one. And that is of course the fact that Tears of the Kingdom is not a sequel to Breath of the Wild. Well, it is, but when you look at it as its own thing, then it's so much better. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom work better without each other. You can go your whole life playing just one of these games. Tears of the Kingdom's story isn't reliant on the events of its predecessor, and Breath of the Wild's story has a great ending that doesn't need a sequel. I mean, the only reason Tears of the Kingdom exists is because the developers had so many ideas that they couldn't fit it all into one DLC. So you can look at each game individually and they stand alone perfectly. And this is true with every Zelda game, in fact. You do not need to play Ocarina of Time to enjoy Majora's Mask. Same thing with Phantom Hourglass and Wind Waker. Same thing with The Legend of Zelda and The Adventure of Link. All of these are direct sequels, and they don't need to rely on the previous game to be amazing. Same with Tears of the Kingdom. Yes, it is a sequel to show how Hyrule has changed and evolved, but it can also be viewed as its own game. And I see that so many others don't see it that way, which is a shame because I am more than certain that this is what the developers planned. I see so many say that the game is a terrible sequel because it mentions almost nothing about Breath of the Wild and doesn't feel connected, but that was not the intent. All the side quests from Breath of the Wild are not carried over to Tears of the Kingdom. The game assumes you just beat the main story, not do all the side stuff. So some characters from side quests don't recognize Link because they either forgot about him somehow, or the game thinks you didn't do them, aside from the Tarrey Town quest, because they're not really important. At least that's how I see it. And I wish others saw it that way as well, but I cannot change people's minds just like that. So, oh well. But that is why Tears of the Kingdom is both a sequel and not one, depending on how you look at it. And that is pretty much the main reasons why so many hate this game. Well, I say so many, but it's really not. The people who actually dislike Tears is actually the minority. Most see the game as way better than Breath of the Wild. But the people who have a lot of negative comments have been getting a lot of attention by the algorithm, that it seems like most actually hate the game. But once you go digging, it's not like that at all. So yeah, for those who are hopping on me for not talking about the bad stuff in my positive video, I hope you're happy now. I see your side of the story, but I only agree with like one or two of your reasons. So to end off on a positive note, let's do something positive. That of course is clicking the subscribe button. You want more weekly Zelda content? Then you may just enjoy my content. So give me a shot, and you may not regret it. So with that, thank you for watching, and remember, let's always try see the good and bad sides of things. Expand our understandings of things, and we may come around to the other side. And let's also be respectful of others' opinions. Whether you love it or hate it, understand others' points of views. And before anyone goes to the comments, yes, I probably did not mention every single issue, but I was just discussing the things that I see most often thrown about.
Hi, post-recording me back again. If you didn't know already, this is my final video of the year. I just want to take a break for the holiday season, just to work on some scripts and stuff like that, just to prepare for the new year. So yeah, I'll probably be I'll continue within the first 2 weeks of January, so be on the lookout for that. you for watching, and thank you for all the support throughout these past like month and a half or so. Yeah, like a month and a half. I wasn't expecting to reach where I am, so I just want to say thank you, and I